Thank you, John. And we have time for questions. Do you just want to field the questions yourself?
Sure.
Okay, great.
Questions or criticism or pushback or suggestions? Yes, ma'am. And why don't you say who you are so your neighbors can get to know you?
My name is Giti Underhill. I live in Navata. And I would-
Wait for the mic.
Microphone is here. Okay.
My name is Giti Underhill, and I live in Navato. I would like to ask you if you would change your libertarian status to Republican and run with Mitt Romney, as vice president.
No.
I just brought my wife. My name's Larry Weens. I'm from Danville. I just want my wife home from getting a hip replacement today, and you reminded me of what happened to us. We asked a lot of people, where's the best hip surgeon in the world, and they said in Fremont. We went there, had a fabulous experience. On the way out, we saw that a national survey had given this orthopedic surgery #1 status for 3 years in a row. So people find the best on their own.
People figure it out. Yeah, you wouldn't have to do it on the way to the hospital. Just reputation determines that. Why don't you just give the mic to whoever you want to give the mic to who has a hand up? There's a guy in the back there.
John, you're also streaming questions.
Yeah, I'm Joel Kane from San Francisco. John, a personal question, if I might. I remember my family's a speech pathologist, and they wanted me to ask you how you overcame your stuttering.
I am a stutterer. Obviously, I've largely overcome it. I still have trouble sometime. After failing at many attempts, found a place called, I forget what it's called, the Precision Fluency Shaping something, but it's in Hollins, Virginia. It's really boring. You have to be really motivated to do it. Over 3 weeks, they slow us down and reteach us how to make each sound. So they slow us down to 2 seconds per syllable. That was a half second per syllable. 2 seconds is really long. But I was motivated because I was on television and I was going to give up my job because I was blocking and scared every morning. So I was very thankful that I found help there. And I thought, this place has to, this is also the area of the fatal conceit of the central planner. I thought, this really worked for me. I was going to put this on TV and tell all the stutterers you're being ripped off if you do something else. And I did refer lots of people to this place, and some are not helped. So we're all different. Now, David just gave me some printed questions. What? They're streaming? How does this work?
The streaming questions come in.
How do they come in?
They're watching you on TV.
They're watching on TV, and they type, and they send this, and you print it. Wow, isn't that cool? Jenna Harrington of Manhattan. No, they're in Manhattan, too. I guess they have TV there. What tools can we use in order to efficiently promote the message of liberty? It's tough. I mean, I'm trying my... I think there's one thing that's now the best way to do that of all the things I can think of, and that's to buy everyone you know a copy of No, They Can't.
John?
And, you know, look, it's, if we get it on the bestseller list with Rachel Maddow's book, they discount it, more people than will hear the ideas.
John, there are many things all of us would like to see. Many of those things can't be done or won't be done. If you had to list your top few things you'd like to see happen that could happen or would happen soon, what would you recommend?
Eliminate a bunch of cabinet agencies like the ones that the Texas governor couldn't remember. I mean, he said the EPA. I think we need a limited EPA, but commerce happens without a department. Interior, we don't need that. Labor, people work without a labor department. Education, that's a local responsibility, and so on. Legalize drugs, and stop adding new rules. Just stop all regulation, or before you pass a new one, you have to repeal 10 old ones. Those would be my first steps.
Mr. Stossel, I like your example Osborne, of the car, right? We all have perfect information. We can buy the right car based on the information, but don't we need government to make sure that people are accurately reporting their information, like the SEC, to make sure that people routinely and uniformly produce the right financial statements so we know who to invest in? Who's going to incentivize people to do that?
The market. The SEC, I would argue, makes it worse because the SEC gives you the illusion of protection. You think you're safe, and then some people give all their money to Bernie Madoff. Remember, after Enron, we got Sarbanes-Oxley. That was going to make us all safe. And now we have Dodd-Frank, and that's supposed to make us all safe. But all it does is enrich lawyers, and now all these companies have compliance departments. I've never heard this word until last few years. Compliance, that's just disgusting. That means they're not creating anything. They're just trying to game the system or understand the system. The free market would take care of that, and we should assume there will be cheaters, and you protect yourself. Or, if you weren't relying on government, there would be private groups who would issue stock advisories, and we would trust this one or not that one. Far better than just assuming the government protects us. While the mic goes to somebody, I'll do another from the magic of the internet. I don't like that one. To understand the argument, one must understand the opponent. Why is it that we're living in a society? This is from Chris Wessling of Belmont, West Virginia. Why are we living in a society that believes that government is the answer? Well, I mean, I'm waiting for a counter-argument, but I think for normal people, not you, this is just intuitive. People have lives. They don't pay attention. They want a mommy leader to guide them. And they really thought they had one here. Some still think they have one there. Whoever has the mic.
I was, a few minutes ago, earlier on in your talk, you spoke about how young people don't seem to vote. And of course, from my take, a lot of young people seem to be turning on to the ideas of liberty through Ron Paul running his campaign. Enormous rallies. I've seen numbers at his rallies that don't even seem to come close to what the Republican front runner is running, and yet it doesn't seem to translate into poll numbers. So I think there's an opening there for an investigative journalist like yourself to maybe get some more answers there, because I'm not honestly figuring it out. And just saying that they don't vote, there's some disconnect here that I'm just not understanding. I was wondering if you could explore that a little more, just briefly.
Well, I love it that Ron Paul is getting 12% in the polls and in the vote, and he's really introducing people to the idea of liberty. And he told me, 7,000 people showing up here in California at some rally, I think at UCLA. But, maybe they're intensely passionate, but the majority of people are voting for somebody else. And when I say young people don't vote, I'm just looking at the statistics. A lower percentage of young people vote. More older people vote. And frankly, I'm okay with that, because most young people are clueless and don't know anything. I don't want them to vote. I'm just pointing out that we Medicare recipients are taking all your money.
John, I know that your brother is a physician, and he's been worked under Medicare since the beginning. He's probably when it first came out through now, and I'm sure you've had discussions with him about government-run health care. What does he think the best way to do, and what do you think is going to happen if Obamacare is overturned?
My brother is a physician. He's my smarter older brother. He's actually more of a scientist. He didn't get interested in politics until recently. I think I radicalized him a bit. It's funny, his son is a lefty and the editor of The Atlantic, Scott Stossel. But Tom Stossel, my brother, is now reading Adam Smith and von Mises in the bathroom. He's newly radicalized. But being a Harvard scientist, he is so narrowly focused. He's not a retail physician. He barely knows what Obamacare is. He's obsessed with all the rules now that say researchers are not supposed to cooperate with industry. And he alone among scientists is the one pushing back all these conflict of interest rules. And he talks about it to the point that even I, the libertarian, get sick of hearing him complain about these things. But it is a real problem. He's looking for allies in this. He started an institute to fight all the compliance nonsense that's slowing progress in research. So if you want to help him, contact him.
Here's a question.
Tom Stossel.
Next door.
A question from next door. The overflow room. You jokingly said supermarkets rarely poison us, but seriously, most of the cheap foods out there are loaded with toxic pesticides and GMOs, genetically modified organisms. Most people are unaware of this, and the free market does not seem to be doing anything. How many millions have to die first? Well, I'm glad you're in the other room. All right, let's break down his points one by one. All right, most of the cheap foods out there are loaded with pesticides and GMOs. GMOs first. That's genetically modified organisms. What do you think crossbreeding is, except a slower version of genetic modification? You think a French poodle is natural? Pesticides. He says toxic pesticides. Well, they're toxic to the pests, and lots of chemicals are toxic to people. At these small doses, they are utterly harmless. Farmers are exposed to 1,000,000 times more of them than we are, and farmers live longer than average. And we've been eating many more of these toxic pesticides and GMOs and chemicals in the past 10 years, and what's the result? We're living longer than ever. Most people are unaware of this. How? Hysterics like you, this is unsigned, are telling everybody, and the idiot media is constantly screaming about phony threats like this. The free market does not seem to be doing anything about this. Good. The other point is I joked about people being poisoned. People think it's government that keeps us from being poisoned by food, and government has a huge, expensive FDA and Department of Agriculture safety regulation for food, and it probably helps a little, but it is primitive. Like all government agencies, it doesn't change. It doesn't innovate over time. So in every chicken plant, a union inspector looks at every bird as it goes down on the line, looking for visible signs of too much fecal matter. In an age of microbiological testing, this is what they still do. But fortunately, much more important than food regulation, safety regulation, is the reputation of the company. In a free market, they all know if they poison people, they are toast. If McDonald's has a bad outbreak, they lose zillions of dollars. So every food company puts much more effort into maintaining the safety of its food. I mean, the tests, if they find a tiny bit of bacteria, they shut the whole thing down. They clean it with steaming water. They have all these specialized, I can't say it, but I have a chapter in the book about that. They do much more than government because reputation and companies' selfish worry about their reputation protects us better than the central planners ever will.
Mr. Stossel, back here a question. Typically, a country's environmental response is predicated on the amount of disposable income available for such things. And as we've seen over the last several decades, ever since the first Earth Day, government has allocated more and more to the environmental movement. What impact do you think that movement has had on the free market, and why?
It crimps the free market. Of course, every time somebody has to focus on an environmental rule rather than producing more of their product or charging less for it, we're a little poorer. But I say thank God for the EPA. When I was young, you couldn't open your window in New York City because soot would come in. They've gotten rid of, look, a lot of us libertarians say the Constitution is all we need. I would go further than that because the Constitution said black people were 3/5 of a person. We amended that. Constitution has nothing about these pollution rules. And Hayek said a small safety net is a reasonable thing for government to do. But I'm really glad we have an EPA. Pure libertarians say the tort system could handle it. It's your private property, your air, your water. But given our slow judicial system, I think that would be impractical. So good for the EPA for getting rid of the particulate matter in the air. Good for the EPA for requiring sewage treatment plants so I can swim in the Hudson River, as I do. But enough already. Let's stick a fork in it and say it's done. All right, that's a joke. It's not done, but it's largely done. Now you get to diminishing returns. They did all the big progress, and they keep getting bigger and doing more. They're going to make the air so pristine that we're broke. And that's what the bureaucrats do. If they're a bureaucrat at the EPA, they feel they're not doing their job unless they're passing more rules. Plus, the kind of people who want to be an EPA bureaucrat tend to be environmental zealots. So they were wonderful, now they're a threat to freedom and prosperity. David handed me, how did you land your gig? This is from Rob, whoever he is. How did you land your gig at Fox Business? Did they reach out to you? Sadly, no. I was at ABC for 28 years, and people would say, why don't you go to Fox? You'll be more sympathetic audience, you'll be more comfortable, and I would always answer, don't want to preach to the converted. I want to talk to people who haven't heard these ideas before, who don't know about free markets. And I had a big audience at ABC. My first specials were watched by 15 million people. These are American Idol numbers. That was largely because our silly government had limited the number of channels. You didn't have a lot of choices. But finally that broke, and we had many more choices, and now 2020 reaches 5 million people, and Bill O'Reilly with repeats reaches 5 million people. And always my career at ABC, these stories were a fight. People would say, you really should soften that. This can't be, how can you say rent control hurts poor people? Because these lawyers and liberal producers just had no clue about these ideas, and I fought them for 28 years, and finally I had enough. It also got worse at the end. I had done a show on healthcare, government healthcare, after Michael Moore came out with his movie Sicko, where he said Cuba was great. And we went to Canada and found some great healthcare places. We had the cutting-edge medicine. You got treated right away. You had to meow or bark to get that kind of treatment, because vet care is still private. But it was a good show, and then Obamacare happened, and I said, let's update this show. Obamacare is the issue of the day. Oh, no, we're not interested. You're predictable. Your libertarian stuff is predictable. Likewise, I did a show called Stupid in America about education choice, about how there should be education choice. I was worried that it wouldn't get good ratings because kids sitting in a classroom isn't sexy like what they cover. But it got great ratings. So 5 years later, now there was an education choice movement. There were charter schools. Stuff was happening. Even Al Gore's producer made that movie. What's it called?
The lottery? Waiting for Superman.
Waiting for Superman, which really said pretty much the same thing I said. And so I say, let's update this, cover this. Nah, Michael Jackson died. We have to cover okay. We have to interview his sister this week. How about this week? No, Michael Jackson still did. We have to report on that. So I went to Fox and begged them to hire me, and fortunately they did. And at Fox Business Network, half of you don't even get the network, so it's a smaller audience. But this charity, Stossel in the Classroom, now is in enough classrooms that more people watch me in high schools than watch 2020. So, the heck with 2020. 2020 just covers crime and kidnappings of pretty blonde people. Yes.
Well, John, I mentioned before I'm a high school teacher who has enjoyed using Stupid in America. in my classroom for at least 10 years. I guess it's been about 10 years. And I get a kick out of showing it. I wish I had time in my curriculum to show more of your DVDs. I show about 2. But when you look at your old programs, are there any guests, and I'm thinking about Chavez and Oakland Unified or that governor of South Carolina, but are there any guests you look back at and with hindsight you wince and you say, oh, I wish I hadn't used this support, or I wish I hadn't used this expert in my program?
But I don't get the point. What did Chavez do that I should know
Well,
about?
Chavez has kind of had a checkered past since then. Now, maybe this is because of Oakland Unified more than Chavez, but he was asked to leave. And now there's a big ethics thing about how money was spent in Ben Chavez's schools, and he's had to appear in court about that. Heads are going to roll about the money and him writing checks to himself and his own companies. So it's that type of case. Maybe it's more of a local story than I thought. But he's down, I think, in Arizona
apparently.
now. He's down in Arizona, but he's had to come back and testify and whatnot.
Well, they persecuted him because he was successful, and he told them that they were. Maybe they persecuted him because he exposed the blob, the education establishment, for the horrible people they were who were hurting children. And maybe this is just a witch hunt. I don't know, but thank you for pointing this out, and I will investigate that. And, the fact that Mark Sanford claimed he was on the Appalachian Trail when he was having an affair in Argentina, that doesn't discredit his school choice ideas. We always worry when we're interviewing people, is something who we're relying on this person, and for this part of the story, is something going to come out? We try to check them out. But I can't think of anybody I've regretted. And by and large, the ideas stand for themselves. And the results of Ben Chavez's schools, they went from the worst schools with the most so-called underprivileged kids to the highest performing in California. So regardless of what he's accused of doing with checks, he got results. And he's a great talker on TV.
Well, my name's Stephen Pilling, and I was thinking about things I would like to ask you if I had the chance to talk to you personally. Since I didn't, I thought I'd raise my hand for the mic. And I wanted, after 100 thank yous, I wanted to ask the question, would you consider doing something like Milton Friedman did for PBS with his freedom of choice?
Freedom to choose.
Freedom to choose, thank you. And
free to choose.
Free to choose. And do something like he did. If he was able to get to PBS, which I kind of find surprising, and you would be considered sort of exotic, I would think, in that environment. And they would probably be happy to, entertain. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. No, I mean they really would listen, because and I heard from him 30 years ago now, and now I hear from you, and I mean that with all due respect.
I think David's derisive laughter is the better answer to that. I would too think that they would welcome these ideas and want to argue with me perhaps, but they are close-minded. I mean, NPR, radio. I mean, I'm an author now. I've had 2 best-selling books, and this one, which I hope will be a bestseller, and all of us authors most want to get on those PBS, on those NPR shows, because they don't scream, they have a reasoned discussion, they go on longer, they sell books. They interview every wacko left-wing author all the time. So you'd think they'd put me on. They never have. I got on the local one in Utah, and she even attacked me. She said, John Stossel, an unabashed libertarian who blah, 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 blah. She talked about my stuttering, a nice long interview, and she finally said, so do you really consider yourself a reporter? Isn't it wrong that you have a point of view? And I said, well, I think you have a point of view. No, I don't. Well, you called me an unabashed libertarian. I bet you would never call anyone an unabashed Democrat. Oh, I would use the same. I'll bet you money that you would never. And then the interview turned bad a little bit after that. But these national NPR shows, what is it, All Things Considered, and the woman who, Terry, some gross, we asked to get on, and you'd think they'd want to argue with me, or just if it's a bestseller, at least say, here are these ideas. They won't have me on. So Bob Chittister got Free to Choose on PBS.
Because he had a PBS station.
He ran a PBS station before that, and maybe that's why. And maybe they didn't realize how threatening Milton Friedman was. I don't know. It was great that he got to do that. I would love to get on NPR and PBS, but I can't.
Thanks. Can you pull another stream?
John?
Yes.
Denise Kahn, Walnut Creek. You talk about the EPA being sort of good. You mentioned other departments. Why aren't you saying privatize? I'm looking at the FDA versus Underwriters Laboratory. Which one actually makes us safer that we don't think about day to day?
Well, the EPA, I don't see how you can effectively privatize pollution control for the whole country. The FDA, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, people rely on the FDA. Their mandate is make sure the drugs are safe and effective. And if there's any death, that somebody's head is going to roll. So this means that they're very scared about approving new things. Their first big success was thalidomide. This was this drug that some women took during pregnancy. They gave birth to kids with no arms and no legs. And it wasn't that they were so clever that they detected the problem with thalidomide. They were just so slow that by the time it was nearing the end of the approval process, the bad effects were being seen in Europe and Australia. So they saved us from thalidomide. Hooray. And I'm glad they did. But is it worth it? Now I have to say no. I agree with you, because since then they grew like all bureaucracies. Now to get a new drug approved, it takes 10 years, costs about $1 billion. So a few years back, they said they were approving a new beta blocker. This new heart drug, they announced at the press conference, this new heart drug will save 14,000 American lives a year. And that was great, except nobody at the press conference stood up to say, hey, great, but didn't that also mean you killed 14,000 people last year? And the year before, and the year before? No reporter asked that because reporters don't think that way. But it did mean that. Think about it, 10-year approval process. Right now in this 10-year pipeline, there are fat substitutes that would let you eat all the chocolate cake you want and not get fat. We want to make sure, intuitively, let's make sure there's no carcinogen in there. Let's make sure that it's safe and effective. And that's our instinct. Except thousands of Americans die because they're too fat. They would be saved now. Don't they count? No, not really, not in the bureaucrats' eyes, because if he approves something that saves somebody's life, nobody knows. If he approves something that hurts somebody, he's in trouble. The media makes it worse, because we can take a picture of the thalidomide baby. We did. We put him on the cover of Life magazine, Time magazine. But I don't know. I can't take a picture of whose life might be saved by the new drug, because I don't know who it is. Could be somebody here. So the bias is against approving things. Now, most people, unlike you and your wisdom, say, well, no FDA, it's just the snake oil sellers would poison us. But that's not true, because the private sector would step in and do the job better, faster, more cheaply. Groups like Underwriters Laboratories or Consumer Reports.
Or
Or who?
ECRI, the private drug testing laboratory.
Or a private drug testing laboratory that I've never heard of. But there would be all kinds of things that would appear and would do the job better. But above all, in a free society, I mean, I think it's pretty amazing that in America, we are not allowed to put in our own, if you're dying, you're not allowed to try something. It's forbidden. It ought to be our choice. And those of us who are cautious might only take those FDA-approved drugs. But if you were terminal, you could experiment without having to break America's laws and import something illegally from Europe or sneak into Mexico. And we'd learn from that experimentation. But above all, it ought to be about freedom. And Patrick Henry didn't say, give me absolute safety or give me death. It's about freedom. And we've become very wimpy about that.
Let's get one from the streamer first, please.
from the streamer. Okay, Gene Harrington. Did I do this one? Yes, I did this one. Sorry, I put that up there. Marcus Pham of Temecula, okay, California, via YouTube. Man, this is cool. Being here from California, we obviously find an abundance of philosophical opposition. What, you saying that people are stupid in California, Marcus? What's your opinion of the best argument on behalf of private institutions versus public institutions when discussing it with our peers? Private versus public. Well, it's true. People like public. Public is nice and for everybody. And private is selfish. But think about schools and supermarkets. Public schools, I think we should call them government schools. What's public about them? Can you go into your kid's school anytime you want? No, they might arrest you. But the private supermarket is open all the time. I'm on the board of Central Park. It's a public park, but now it's a private charity that maintains it. It was awful. Now it's good. You think public is good? Think public toilets. Does that convey a good image? Those are my best arguments.
Hi, I come from a little country called Israel, and in Israel we did change the system, the economic system, from a union-run country to a much more capitalistic one, and the Israeli economy is doing very well. And my question to you, do you think that size of the country has anything to do with it? Hong Kong is doing well, but it's a very small place, unlike the United States.
No, I think this is one of those areas where size doesn't matter. Once you get past 300 people, I think you have either a free society or not. And if you're a big country or a small country, in terms of economic growth, it doesn't matter. I mean, I don't really agree with you about Israel. Israel has a big boom in tech, because tech wasn't regulated to death, but the whole attitude of Israel is sort of socialistic. There's an economist there whose name is eluding me, who's really fighting against this, and nobody will pay any attention to him. I mean, they have all kinds of cartels in Israel and rules and welfare states, and Israel's a mess, but it's got educated Jews, so they overcome it, but it's still got lots of socialism there.
It used to be worse, though.
It used to be worse. Okay.
John, hi, I'm George Zimmer, and I'm a capitalist, and I have enjoyed listening to your talk. But
are you a radio host? Listen to that voice.
So my question concerns. By the way, I applaud your support of the EPA. But here's the question I'm trying to ask: in a capitalist society, how do we make sure that companies, in this case, I want to talk about fracking for oil. How do we know that oil companies, in order to make larger profits, are not endangering us with this process? And it ties back to that pipeline that has been discussed.
Well, it's two different points, the pipeline and fracking. Fracking is hydraulic fracturing, which is why we don't have an energy crisis in America, because by doing this, they've discovered vast new fields of oil and natural gas, and that's wonderful for us. It is a chemical-laden process. It involves exploding the rock, and it's creepy. And there's this movie, Gasland, which shows somebody lighting his faucet. That gets your attention. Now, it turns out that the government investigated that guy's faucet, and it was natural leakage into his well. There's lots of methane in the ground already, and if you got a poorly sealed well, that stuff happens. Fracking could cause it, and that's a reason there should be some environmental rules about this. But we've had lots of fracking. The fracking is done below the water table. I think most of it's safe. But there's now a public outcry. This is the good political balance. Some people will scream, the government will get involved, and I hope there's a reasonable balance that allows fracking to continue. And it is important they do it properly and that they seal the pipe that they put down. The other point you mentioned was, I just spaced on it. The pipeline. I mean, this one is ridiculous. This, like, the graphic the news programs show is this pipeline going through pristine Nebraska. It might leak and poison everything. But why don't they put up that other picture, which shows how there are already 1 million pipelines going through Nebraska? And thank God, because that's how we get our fuel. And this would just be one more. But it's the new political hysteria over this Keystone pipeline that prevents us from getting oil and natural gas from Canada. Now they're going to ship it to China. And we'll pay more. One more question. Last person who wants the microphone? Okay, then why don't... Oh, David is handing me the last one. What is your position on... Immigration. Oh, completely open immigration, says Jackson. I'm for completely open immigration, but as Milton Friedman says, you can't have open immigration and a welfare state, because then people will come here to freeload. I would add now, as something, since he said that, you can't have open immigration when there are religious fanatics who want to murder us. So we ought to have work permits to let people in so they don't sneak in, and more open borders and people who want to hire people. There shouldn't be limits on these visas. We should let more people in. Immigrants built America, but we do need border controls and limits. Please, Father's Day, Mother's Day coming up, get me on the list so we can discount this book. Thank you very much.
There is one heck of a lot more that this book covers. It's everything from topics like immigration to food safety to war to you name it. So I really hope you get a copy, and it's a great read. It's witty. It's a great book. I want to thank John Stossel for coming and joining with us and for his work. If you join with me again. And I want to thank all of you for coming and making our event this evening so successful. For those of you who have not gotten a copy of his book, there are copies right next door, and he would be delighted to autograph copies. Please join with us in the future. Our website is independent.org, and thank you and good night.